Hi, everyone, and welcome to another podcast of Unpacking Organizations, Org Design and Workforce Planning podcast, where Shradha and I talk about our passion topics. Shradha, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Hello, everybody. How are you, Rupert?
And I'm living the dream,
I
always
love
living
that.
the dream. Life is
I
good.
love that.
I can't
Love that.
complain, and even if I would, who would care? But anyway, except for you, Shradha, I know you would.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
So we have a question. We have a question.
Yes.
Shradha, what's the question?
The question that I have been thinking about, Rupert, is we have been talking a lot about work in our episodes in our podcast, that we need to understand the work. We should always start with what works get done, not with the people, yada yada. And then we also talk about understanding the value chain of the business, how the business value gets created, how it gets transformed from one step to another, and what outcomes that we create. And this question is not from an HR practitioner lens. I'm asking this question from everybody who is a business leader out there and need to understand the work that needs to be done and the value chain of the business. But for them, I want to ask this question to you, Rupert, is that where is the connection between the two? Where do we connect that where I understand the work, perhaps I understand the value chain of how the business value gets created. How do I interlay or interplay these two constructs? And why do I need to know that as a business leader?
Cool. I think a little bit of terminology here. So value
Mm-hmm.
chain. So the simplest way to think about a value chain is you start off with your inputs. Those inputs get transformed into an output, and that output you generates revenue. The inputs and the work cost money to generate. So you might cost money for the raw materials, cost money to transform that through a manufacturing process or whatever process. And so you have costs and you have revenue. So you can, in a way, think of the value chain almost as a P&L, um, where the output is the revenue, and then you've got the direct costs, and then you've also got everything that's supporting that, which is often called the indirect or overheads, etc. And there's a flow. Often people use chevrons, so you have starting point, and you have chevron, 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 and so you have those steps, which in some respects is a simplistic visualization of it, but I think it's helpful. And every industry and every business has its own value chain, and it's important to think about, well, who's the customer, who are you doing it for? So if you're a hospital, it's for the patient, and you have a bunch the work that you do, and the value is making someone healthy, or giving them a good death, in the sense of palliative care. If you're mining, it's the value chain is, well, getting to the iron ore through explosive and what have you, and then extracting that and doing some transformation and selling it. So it varies everywhere, and it's really done at a high level in the business. And then you ask the question about making money, and this is quite interesting because a lot of people don't know really what the key driver of making money is. And I think it's quite useful to go to Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he talks about the hedgehog concept. It's a little bit of a segue off your question, Shredder, but I think
That's
it is
fine.
relevant. Are you familiar with the hedgehog concept from Jim
Not
Collins?
really, actually. No.
So it's a big best-selling strategy book,
Yeah, I
and
am
and
familiar
you
with the
know the
book.
title, yeah.
Yep.
And so in that, you've got, to be unique. He asked three questions. Question number one is, what do you need to be best in the world at? So, to be a great business, you have to be the best in the world at something. What is that thing? And if you think about that, that is your core value chain that you make the most money. So you have a capability that helps you drive the value. What are you the best in the world at doing that one thing? What are you passionate about? So if you're not passionate about doing this, you're just not going to be the best. So it's kind of a self-fulfilling, and everyone in the organization needs to be really, really passionate about that. And then the third question he calls the cash engine, because it's all well and good to be passionate and be the best in the world at something, but if you can't make money off it, it was economically not viable. You're dead in the water. And the way he talks about the economic engine is a metric divided by something. So, in each industry and each company has something different. Um, Southwest Airlines is all around how quickly they can turn planes around and how much time and how much time is a plane in the air versus on the ground. Um, and so and software, your engine is what is the customer lifetime value, and you divide it by something divided by the CAC, the acquisition cost. So that's an engine. And often when you ask this question but also to CEOs, interestingly, you get a smorgasbord of metrics. And so people again distilling down to the essence of the key thing. And so that's really value chain thinking. It's quite strategic and it's about transforming and core capabilities, etc.
Right. And also, it helps you understand that you don't have to be good at everything, which many large organizations then start to get into. Get like you have to be good at one thing that drives the value for which you are in the business for, right? Like if you're in technology, you really don't have to be best in vendor governance. Or maybe you do if that is what the business value driver is.
Yeah. So it might be brand, and you're a
Mm.
branded business.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it might be product development.
Yep.
It might. So there's a whole range of, and that's your value chain. That's how you make money. So then
Right.
the other thing is the value chain gets broken down into processes and sub processes, and eventually activities. And human beings do activities, and an activity is something that you're doing that you spend your time on, and that is you bundle that down and say, well, there is a human being or a group of humans, in roles that get broken into. They do this set of work, and then when you can see the number of different people involved across each sub process, all the way up to the value chain, and understand. Then you can start to understand the number of handoffs, for instance. So how many different people, one person's input is someone else's output. So it's all input, activity, output, but my output is your input. So the work flows, and that isn't always, obviously, it isn't physical. It's also knowledge. It could be, you're a project manager, right? So it's just, it's you're dealing in information and structuring what work happens. Could be concept designs that get turned. So, if you're in advertising, so there's a whole range of different things, and
And it
that
flows
work,
up as well, right? Sometimes it gets consolidated and then goes to a different department. So there is a
yeah.
whole
And
workflow
that's where
that
the
happens.
organization design and the
Yes.
structure comes in. So,
Yep.
with the work, you can think bottom up all the activities and how they flow up into the value chain. I quite like doing it the other way, where I start at the top and I define the value chain,
Yes.
and break it down and down until I've got the activities and the group of activities that someone does. And my rule of thumb that if someone has more than 10, 15 activities, I've probably gone into too much detail. And the example I use in the book is feed the staff. And so there's a value chain about the staff. It's a supporting activity, need to be fed. So imagine there's a single person canteen, and there's one person that develops the menu, buys in the supplies, cooks the food, preps the food, serves the food, tidies everything up. That's possible. Well, in that scenario, the workers feed staff, and it's one thing, and it's one role that does it. I don't need to define any more detail. But imagine a scenario where I'm in a massive, say, hotel, and there are multiple kitchens, and so you have people designing the menu, and it could be a hotel chain, so it could be a whole menu design coming up with concepts and ideas, releasing, and and you're not just going to design the menu. You have someone designing the dessert, someone designing the snacks, um, and that's a whole product development process. And then you have someone food preparation, and some of that could be outsourced to suppliers. And the food preparation of butchering is very different to vegetable. There's so the work gets broken down. So as the scale of the organization increases, the level of detail in terms of defining the work and and we break this into a taxonomy, an activity taxonomy that just breaks into more detail. And that's where I find people getting unstuck, because you start the value chain. Most business leaders, okay, I understand how we make money, but as you scale, you start breaking things down, because you start to break the role down, and sometimes you can go too far with that.
Yes.
You can
And too
create
much down into the abstractions and,
and too many
yeah.
handoffs and everything else. And so
Yes.
this is where the org design practitioner is really earning his or her coin. That's where you bring it, is dealing with that, so that you can, because you're also designing a role around the work that is actually motivating. Could someone
Right.
actually do that?
Yeah. Yeah.
And is it motivating? And some people would be really, really motivated by being the sole chef and doing everything. But
Mm-hmm.
you're probably only going to cook one or two, like, dishes per lunch or dinner or whatever,
Right.
right?
Right. It's a very
And
different kind of
it's a
business that
totally
you are
different
in then.
thing
Right.
than if you're McDonald's, or a
Right.
huge global franchise. I mean, they've got PhDs optimizing the French fries, literally. Like, like they
Absolutely.
study this, and they study
Yes.
how to make the perfect chips so there's no wastage, and it's a science, and they have PhDs doing this. So
Yes.
that's that to me is the fun of thinking about value chain and the work and motivation and passion, and one person's passion, someone else's boredom. It's
Right.
like,
Right.
um
And I think I go back to that starting point, is that this is not just an HR or an org design practitioner's thinking. I think everybody in the organization need to think about this, because then they are able to understand what the value chain is, um, and able to have that language, common language within the organization, to say that it's not just the leaders who understand what the value chain is, but everybody in the organization understand where we need to be good at, to your point, Rupert, and then what is the passion that we need to align ourselves towards, and therefore how do we make money so that we are in this business for a long term. And that can only happen when it's not driven by just org design people, but it's driven by the entire organization, and it's executed by org design people, perhaps.
yeah. And I think it was interesting when we chatted with Paul Chachinsky,
Mm-hmm.
and how he thought about this, and his experience, like, I think it was at General Foods in the 1970s, and then in Japan, and how they broke it down, and how the group was optimizing the work in the value chain.
Yes.
And he quoted how they went from it costing them 1,000 to 100. They reduced the cost by a factor of 10
Yes.
by the people, and that's where really lean, and a lot of the people optimizing the work.
Right.
And so I had a funny little, and then we should probably wrap up. But I had a little moment yesterday. I was meeting
Sure.
someone for coffee at a coffee shop, and it was a chain, not a big chain, so it wasn't Starbucks or one of these big ones. A sort of, call it a premium chain. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'd already drunken more than enough coffee. It was sort of I had a meeting at 2 in the afternoon, so I wanted a tea. This is in London, so you drink tea.
Of course.
And I want a little bit of milk in the tea, English breakfast tea. But you only need like a little bit of milk. And he gave me this huge pot of milk. And I said, "Why are you giving me such a big pot? Is this for tea?" Like,
Yeah.
he's like, "Well, that's the policy." I said, what
What
do you
does
mean?
that
He's
mean?
like, I'm not allowed to give you less milk. So I said, but what's going to happen to this milk? It's going to be wasted. Yeah, it's wasted. So, but you got people drinking tea all the time.
My gosh.
And so this is the danger, is a small little example. Just yesterday that I was
The
chatting actually to this
policy of
friend
too
who was
much
a
milk.
org design practitioner, and we were both chatting with both sort of optimizing the flow of this this coffee place. But
Reducing
you know,
waste.
it is waste. This is
Yes.
not good for anyone. It costs money. It's bad for them. It's just bad all round. And having the top down, and this is the danger for the org design practitioner. If you think that you can design the work and understand it without dealing with the people who know,
Right.
then you're really in trouble, right? Because yes, you want, and they have this big pot, and but then they're not into the head of, well, how do people actually consume milk
Right.
in the tea, and why don't we have different sizes? And actually, to your point, milk wastage is a huge value drag
Hmm.
on. It's one of the biggest. I think the milk costs more than the coffee.
Yeah,
You know, it's
absolutely.
a
Or the
huge driver.
water
So
that is being driven. Yeah,
the
that's
water's
part of
cheap. The
it.
milk's
Yeah.
very expensive, and
Right.
so you got the real estate, which is fixed, but in terms of variable costs, you got the labor, but that's kind of semi-fixed. It's the milk, that's a huge variable cost.
Yep.
And so optimize. And so if you understand the value chain, you understand the P&L, then you can start understanding the work, and then you can start
Very
saying,
great point.
actually, when it comes to decisions, so the who's responsible for the quantity of milk that gets served to I think you should let the store manager or the barista
I love
decide
that
that.
point. Yes, the decision maker is closer to the customer and
Yeah,
to the person who
yeah,
is supposed to be making the decision, who's
yeah,
closer to the work.
yeah,
So that's a great point that when we understand the value chain, we understand what we should be good at, what should be our passion, where should we save money, then when we start doing the work, give the decision and accountability those who are closer to the customer and those who are closer to the work, so that they can, to
exactly.
your Japanese example, they were
Yeah,
not like managed, but they were self-optimizing, and they
yeah,
were actually running the whole show and cutting cost on a daily basis. That's a
yeah.
fantastic point to wrap up this episode, Rupert. So any takeaways for you?
Takeaways for me is value chain is a term that you often hear spouted around. So go back to good to great and think about, well, what do we want to be the best in the world at? And what are we passionate
Mm,
about? And how do we make the money, the hedgehog concept? And use that as a lens to think about the value chain,
love that.
um, as opposed to
Yeah.
just this abstract set of chevrons on a slide. Uh,
That is so true.
and what about you, Shradha?
Uh, I would say that I would urge every leader of the organization to think through about this. It's not just a operations thought, it's not just like a finance term, not an org design term, but every leader should know about their own value chain and how they're making money, and not just the abstract chevrons, but the real science behind it. So I would say that every leader should immerse themselves in doing that. And that's where we can drive uh, these costs or these efficiencies across the organizations.
Cool. Awesome.
Thank you so much, Rupert. It's always a
Thank you.
pleasure.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.